Well, thanks for that kind introduction, Matt. We hope to provide you with some not only information, but practical information as you go back to your farms. Again, we're talking a lot about emergency preparedness, but a lot of what we're talking about also is good business sense. So again, we hope we can fill both the role of education as well as helping you on the business side. Today, the U.S. dairy industry competes in a marketplace that's more dynamic, complex, and competitive than ever before. The customer, the marketplace, even the way business is being conducted today is all changing, and that means the strategies and tools that you've used in the past to create success probably won't be enough to create success in the future. So again, you have to look at things a little differently. Again, Matt talked about the program today. We've got Dr. Darlene and myself. And I want to start out with this scenario. You're sitting at home on a nice sunny morning and your phone rings, and the next thing you know, it's your field man. And he calls up with a notification message for all producers. And it goes like this. This call is being made to place you on alert and to inform you of an animal disease emergency. There's been a disease animal identified in Greene County, which is just about 30 miles south of here, with symptoms of foot and mouth disease. The state veterinarian has exercised his statutory authority to protect the Wisconsin animal industry by instituting emergency procedures, including stopping the movement across the state of all cloven-hoofed animals and their products until such time that analysis is completed and a determination is made that the movement of animals and their products is safe. You are required to comply with this stop movement order. These procedures will remain in place until we notify you officially that they are no longer in effect. You can tell this was a pre-scripted message. But in essence, your field man ends the call by informing you that for the foreseeable future, the company won't be picking up your number. So just kind of think about what impact that would be. The letter mentioned foot and mouth disease. Again, that's a highly infectious animal disease, viral in nature. And we want to kind of frame our discussion today because that's the worst case scenario. When we talk about stop movement orders, again, that means nothing will enter your farm or nothing will leave the farm. That includes animals, it includes raw milk, it includes feed, equipment. So again, there's some pretty significant implications. Also, because milk won't be leaving the farm, cheese plants won't be, or other dairy processing plants won't be receiving their normal supply of milk either. So again, there's some pretty significant consequences, and because of the infectious nature, it's likely there would be a large quarantine zone and stop movement zone rather than a small one. And we'll kind of cover a little bit of that. The good news is it's not a human health issue. Okay, it's an animal disease. However, because of all the implications, it has the concept of creating significant economic disruption and significant loss, estimated in Wisconsin alone, billions of dollars. And again, it would not most likely be contained only to Wisconsin. Darlene will talk about some of the animal movement and why there'd be a larger stop movement, possibly nationally. So to kind of think about this, we want to talk about safeguarding the dairy industry. You can't safeguard something unless you have some preparation. So to frame the talk, I want to talk about an FMD outbreak. And again, there will be some sort of initial infection because it takes a while for clinical signs to appear. There won't be any type of detection. There'll be a lag time. And then as the disease progresses, there's going to be some losses. Again, we talked about stop movement orders and possibly euthanation of some infected herds. So there's going to be loss of raw milk revenue, possible loss of your herds. Again, cheese plants can't operate. They're not going to have milk. Their employees are going to be down. They're going to lose sales, etc. So when we talk about preparedness, there's a set of losses, eventually the outbreak comes under control and the losses begin to minimize. So what we always want to do is decrease the time and also decrease the height of the losses. So that's in a simplistic perspective, that's what we want to do. First of all, unless you're aware, there's no way you can do any preparedness. We've kind of covered that already. The preparedness efforts are always first and foremost to prevent anything from happening. If you ask any law enforcement agency, if you have a highly motivated individual, it's unlikely you're probably going to stop them. So again, the fallback then is mitigation strategies to lessen the impact of the outbreak. Also, early detection diagnosis. You can't develop a response unless you understand what you're going to be responding to. So again, once there's detection diagnosis, Darlene will cover that. The response will happen. There'll be an investigation, all with the concept of getting to the recovery phase as quickly as possible. Now, one of the main points we always talk about is any event begins and ends locally. Whether it's your farm, whether it's your community, everything begins locally. Now, that's not to say that during the response, state agencies, federal agencies will come in and aid in the response, but at the end of the day, they're going to pack their bags and leave, and the local community is left with the recovery. So the key point is, if you're not prepared on the front end, the recovery is going to be a lot uglier than it probably will anyway. So again, the whole concept that we advocate is awareness and preparedness to do prevention and mitigation and hopefully do the recovery in a much better state. So with those opening comments, I'm going to turn it over to Darlene, who's going to talk about some of the public sector response plans, and then I'll come back and talk about what the industry can and should be doing in coordination with the government agencies.
Okay. Thanks very much, Matt. All right. Well, I'm just going to give you a basic run through what the state of Wisconsin, along with the USDA, would do in the event of a foreign animal disease response. And again, you can plug in foot and mouth disease into that equation because that is, I think, far and away the one we worry about the most because of its potential to spread, its level of contagion, and so forth. And our mission is to protect the state's agriculture, to protect the state's consumers, animal health, and human health as well. Matt also mentioned a phone call at first, a pretty unpleasant one that you might get in the event of a foot and mouth disease outbreak in the state. And as you can imagine, our office, the state veterinarian's office, as well as the USDA area office, would be having a lot of phone conversations and phone calls going back and forth at that point as well. And for our perspective, probably the most important one is that very first one. We need to be notified before we can initiate a response. And the earlier that first phone call comes, the better off everybody will be. If we can reduce that lag time between the disease being present and when we can identify it, diagnose it, and get control measures in place, the shorter that lag time is, the better off we'll be. And as I mentioned before, we do have, besides the State Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, we work very closely with USDA APHIS, veterinary services in our state. Besides the state veterinarian, there's also an area veterinarian in charge. So if you will, there's kind of two head veterinarians for the state of Wisconsin. And between the federal side and the state side, we work very closely together. And we are charged with the responsibility through state statute to protect the state's agriculture and to control any disease outbreaks in the state. So what does the disease response look like at first? Once we get that initial phone call, and once we understand that there might be a problem on a farm, and that initial phone call, by the way, could be made by a number of people. It could be the private practice veterinarian that's visiting that farm, doing maybe routine herd health that day, sees something unusual, sees cows that are lame, or vesicles or ulcers along the coronary band and in the mouth. Could be the producer themselves that notices something unusual and gives us a call. Could also be a market or dealer worker, a slaughterhouse worker, or somebody at the diagnostic lab that gives us that first call. But once we realize there's a problem, the first thing we'll do is send out a foreign animal disease diagnostician to investigate and see what's going on. That individual is a veterinarian employed by either the state or the federal government that's specially trained to work with foreign animal disease investigations. They've undergone a course out at Plum Island, New York, where they've actually seen some of these diseases in person. They've done a lot of training in recognizing the clinical signs and what samples need to be taken and so forth. So they're the first ones we send out to investigate. And they're going to work very closely with the private veterinarian or the farm owner to try to investigate this disease and see what might be going on. Initially, they will also probably quarantine that farm, depending on the signs they see when they get out there. If they're suspicious enough or worried enough, they'll definitely quarantine the farm until we can get more information. That initially will be more of a precautionary measure, just to try to avoid anything spreading. They'll also collect appropriate samples to ship off for a diagnosis, and they'll assign a priority level to those samples. I'll go into that a little bit more in detail. So who are these foreign animal disease diagnosticians, and who do we have in the field to work with the state, for the state and federal governments, and work with producers and private veterinarians? We've got 10 regions in the state, we have 10 different veterinarians. As it turns out, in Wisconsin, half are employed by the state and half by the USDA. They each cover a fairly specific region of the state, and they're very active in the state. Usually they know a lot of the producers in their area, know a lot of the private veterinarians, and work very closely with them in different disease outbreaks and even routine surveillance and testing. We've also got animal health inspectors and animal health technicians that cover areas of the state and work with the veterinarians. And again, they're both state and federally employed. And one thing to remember, this is mostly for your notes, so you have an idea of who these people are. It's just a list of our district veterinarians in the state of Wisconsin and what areas they cover. And that number by the side is their home office number. And I'd encourage you to get to know these people if you don't already. They're a vast resource for knowledge and for assistance in their districts. They work very closely together and with the state veterinarian's office and the area office for the USDA. And they're your neighbors. I mentioned as well the foreign animal disease diagnostician, who is a specially trained veterinarian, goes out to the farm in question where we think we might have a problem. And they're the ones that are kind of our first line of defense in the state veterinarian's office and in the area office. They kind of make the call. They've got the most experience, they've got the most training. They make the call as to whether this is serious enough to warrant a foreign animal disease investigation, or if it's more likely something more common. If they're suspicious at all, they will opt for the area of most concern, and they'll quarantine the farm and make the call back to the state veterinarian's office and the federal office. And again, we work really closely together. But they'll base their immediate actions on what they see in the field. If they're highly suspicious that foot and mouth disease is likely, or another foreign animal disease, they're going to act quickly to get those samples taken and get the samples sent off as quickly as possible so we can get at least a preliminary diagnosis. Again, I mentioned they'll likely quarantine the farm to avoid any animals moving on or off. So to avoid spread, so we can get this under control as quickly as possible. Again, the quicker we can put control measures in place, the quicker we can recover. And they'll start an epidemiological investigation. And one of the tools that helps them do that in Wisconsin is our premises registration system. It is state law in Wisconsin that those with livestock, horses, poultry, fish, also llamas and emus, register their premises with the state. It's a pretty simple process, either online or via mail with a form. And it is free, and we ask only for contact information for that farm, numbers of different species that are present, and a way to contact individuals. And then the premises are assigned a number, a unique number. So far, we've got over 60,000 registered in the state of Wisconsin. And in some cases, I think we found out a lot of information through the system as well, realizing we have lots of diverse premises that we may not have known we had without this system in place. But it really will help us in the event of a foreign animal disease investigation because it gives us an idea of where different species are located. And it gives us a chance to go to those adjacent properties and start looking for clinical signs, start doing surveillance testing, and it really gives us a jump. This is just a little bit of an example, kind of picked on Monroe County there, I think, as far as perhaps an index premises where maybe we're doing a foot and mouth disease investigation. There's a farm with clinical signs. With our premises registration system, then we can then kind of zero in on the adjacent premises and start doing investigations on those, start looking for clinical signs and so forth. And we know the system's not perfect. We know we don't have every single premises registered in Wisconsin, and we're still going to need to do some door-to-door contacts, some calling on the phone. But having this system in place really gives us a head start, that we can start looking at other farms and keep ahead of the disease. I mentioned before the foreign animal disease diagnostician taking samples at the farm for a laboratory diagnosis. That's really important. For almost any disease I can think of, whether it's a foreign animal disease or not, it's almost impossible to diagnose a specific disease by just looking at the animals and doing physical exams. You really need some sort of specific laboratory diagnosis to really know what you have, or to know what you don't have. In the best case scenario, it could be negative. And then we start looking for other diseases that might cause those signs that aren't foreign to this country. But initially, those samples, if there's a possibility of foot and mouth disease or another foreign animal disease, they need to go to specific laboratories. They need to go to the National Veterinary Services Lab. And for foot and mouth disease, they would go out to Plum Island, New York. The Plum Island facility, Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab. It's off the coast of Long Island, off the tip, and it's pretty isolated. I've been there for a number of years, and I believe you can only reach it by ferry. But it is the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab, and they actually make the call based on the samples they get and what disease we're looking at, if it's a foreign animal disease or not. So getting those samples out there quickly, if we're highly suspicious, is really important. And you might start to think of ways, too, that we can do that. That's part of our planning. We have several options. If we're really concerned and we think this might be a foot and mouth disease outbreak, we're going to try to get them there as fast as we possibly can. And whether it's commissioning the governor's plane or sending them via National Guard jet, we would look into those options as well. They can usually get preliminary diagnosis back to us, say in 12 to 24 hours. It's going to depend a little bit on the samples they get and how much of the virus would be present. And they look at the supporting epidemiology and the report that the veterinarian has written up as well. You can send pictures to them as well, clinical signs you're seeing on the farm. A confirmed positive may take a little longer. Unfortunately, it's not a perfect world yet, and the testing that we have to confirm a diagnosis requires that you either isolate the virus or obtain DNA from the virus itself and actually able to confirm the diagnosis. That takes a bit longer. It could take another 24 hours after the first, or it could take up to several days, depending again on how much virus is present in the samples. So this is just kind of a run through a little bit of a flow chart of what I've been talking about. Initially, you've got a suspected disease. You've got to have somebody out there who raises the red flag, makes the phone call, and says, we've got a problem, so that we can get out there and investigate. But we assigned a foreign animal disease diagnostician to go out to the farm and investigate. And once they get a chance to get out there and look at the situation, they call back to the state veterinarian's office or the USDA area office, and they decide how quickly they're going to move on this, whether it's highly likely or highly suspicious, or whether it's really unlikely. If it's highly likely, things are going to move along much faster. So I mentioned the laboratory diagnosis and the foreign animal disease diagnostician going out and investigating. Well, what happens next? If, in the worst case scenario, we are highly suspicious of foot and mouth disease, go out to the farm, we see the lesions, we send off the samples to the laboratory, they call back with a presumptive positive diagnosis. Their initial diagnosis is positive. At that level, we as the state and the USDA as well are going to start acting. Initial quarantines will be in place. We'll go out to the farm in question and send an advance team. We send 2 or 3 individuals out to the area in question, usually at a county seat, and work with local officials and county officials. And we work together with them. And so we're giving them some advance notice of what we're going to have to be doing in the area with testing and surveillance and interviewing adjoining farms. And we mobilize our incident management team. And I just wanted to mention too, all this occurs under the ICS organization, which is the Incident Command System. And that's basically a centralized command system. It's a system of organization originally put forward by the fire service back in the 70s. And it's a way to make sure there's central command, that every organization knows who they report to, that every organization can communicate with each other and with people in the field, and that communication is consistent. So it keeps things moving along much more smoothly. It also provides for a system to communicate with the public. So public information, accurate, timely messages to the public as well. So it's the way all state and federal agencies work under the Incident Command System. Depending on how large an area is involved and on this preliminary diagnosis, we may or may not have an emergency declaration from the governor. We'll certainly be notifying our state Secretary of Agriculture and the governor's office to get a preliminary diagnosis. And there probably will be additional movement holds put into place beyond just the initial farm in question. And that was what Matt was alluding to at first, too. So I kind of just give you a little schematic of the movement holds. Initially, you're talking about this first contact farm, this first farm of clinical science. We'll say for the purposes of this discussion, it's just one. Go ahead and quarantine that farm and start looking at doing surveillance and investigating the surrounding farms. But if this is foot-and-mouth disease and we get the initial diagnosis, we may have larger quarantines in place, especially depending on over these initial few hours and days, how many other farms start developing clinical signs and how big of an area we have affected. Could pretty easily imagine having area quarantines, either several county areas or regions of the state, or statewide movement holds for Wisconsin. And if we have a confirmed positive of foot-and-mouth disease from the federal side, they could also put interstate movement holds across the country or by region. And we do also have to inform on an international scale, and there will be trade restrictions for the U.S. as well. And again, here's kind of the flowchart version. Gives you a little review. Initial farms quarantine and expedite any further testing. Notifications to the Secretary of Agriculture, Governor, Division of Public Health, other agencies that need to be involved, especially local agencies, and we initiate our response. We have our people on the ground, our district veterinarians and animal health inspectors on the ground doing investigations and epidemiology to try to figure out especially what kind of contacts this initial farm has had, where these animals might be moving, how far basically we have to cast the net to get the disease under control. Kind of mentioned this. One thing I'll talk about on the next slide a little more completely is biosecurity, especially from our standpoint as a state agency and the federal USDA agency. We're going to be very careful about movement on and off these farms, even from our employees' standpoint. We need people to be dressed in disposable coveralls, wearing disposable boots and gloves, need to consider anything else moving on and off the farm, such as essential things like feed trucks. How are we going to handle those? Spraying and cleaning and disinfecting those as they come and go. Also, in order to get the disease under control with a positive diagnosis, we will be depopulating infected animals on these premises. And that's kind of an ugly word and an ugly thing to think about. But again, our mission is to control the disease as quickly as we can and reestablish commerce and reestablish trade and to prevent the disease from spreading. So for many of these diseases, you'll hear us talk about depopulating the animals in question. And then we have to find a way to dispose of those animals once they're humanely euthanized. And that's another big issue as well, is what we're going to do with large numbers of carcasses in the state. So that's something we plan for as well. And then after a period of time, after the disease has run its course and we've been able to contain it, those farms will be able to repopulate at some point in the future. Mention biosecurity. The heifer with the mask is not biosecurity. So I have to thank Donna Gilson for that one. But biosecurity is many things, and it's important to all of us. It's important to everybody in this room, from the state veterinarian down to our district veterinarians, to producers, 4-H, students, and FFA as well. It's what you can do on your initial premises, what we can do at the state level to avoid exposing animals to disease and avoid having the disease spread. So one thing you can do is restrict traffic, or what I like to mention is to keep track of traffic on and off your farm. Know who's coming and going. In this day and age, with the type of production systems we have, maintaining a farm as an island, it probably isn't an option. But keeping good records, knowing when the feed truck's coming, knowing what days your veterinarian visits, knowing who that person is, and when they might be there, that's all really important. It's important to disinfect your clothing, your hands, any equipment going back and forth in vehicles. It's also important to buy animals from reputable dealers and get certification, vaccination records, where those animals may have been before, types of systems they've been in before. To isolate any new animals to the premises, and keep animals separate by age and species and by source. And most importantly, keep good records. That's going to help any individual out the most. And in fact, during the foot and mouth disease outbreak in Great Britain, I believe the first one in 2001, there were several operations within those biosecurity zones that were able to avoid getting the disease because they had good biosecurity practices in place. Also, I wanted to mention, too, I kind of talked about our disease response and what we would be doing as the state and federal agencies. But I want to emphasize, too, we don't work in a vacuum. Just because we're the state, we don't swoop in and take over and leave. Even though, as Matt mentioned, all emergency responses start and end locally. We do work with other individuals, other stakeholders and partners in our disease planning and in our response. We have a system in place called the Wisconsin Animal Health Emergency Management System, and we've been doing strategic planning, identifying stakeholders, identifying groups that might have different responsibilities during a disease outbreak. And those could be industry groups, laboratory networks, University of Wisconsin in our case, and University Extension. Also can include voluntary groups. There's a group we're trying to get together again called the Wisconsin Animal Response Corps. A group of veterinarians, veterinary technicians, other people skilled in handling animals that could help during a disease outbreak as well. And that list is pretty short. It could be much longer than that. All right, I'll turn it back over with that to Matt Matheson.
Thank you, Darlene. Again, if you were paying attention, you saw a series of complex responses. Obviously, all that needs significant planning up front. Again, we tried to kind of simplify it for the 45-minute presentation. We could have spent all day, and in fact, we've spent all day many a time on this subject. Again, recognize it involves many players. The lead players obviously are the government agencies, but private industry is really key to making the response happen effectively. So unless the industry understands what's going to happen, what their role is, it's not going to be an effective response. Darlene mentioned ICS. How many in the room have taken an ICS or understand what ICS is? Okay, we've got a few hands. That's excellent. Again, if you don't understand the response and you want to help, you might be a liability. So again, if FEMA.gov has online training, you can take the ICS 100 and at least get a overview of what it is. Again, it's important to understand that the dairy industry, in this case, plays a key role in the response. So we must all be prepared, and again, prepared as a state, prepared federally, prepared at the local level, prepared at the individual farm. So what I'm going to cover now is some of the things producers can and should do, as well as the rest of the industry. And again, we're framing it around emergency preparedness, but a lot of the things are good business common sense that actually will improve your business. The two issues really that we talk about are business continuity. If milk isn't leaving your farm, animals aren't leaving your farm, that's an issue. Okay? And if that milk can't get to the plants, again, the whole system suffers. So in any response, there's immediate loss of current milk supply. Darlene talked about one of the responses is depopulation. And with that, then obviously that's an impact on future milk supply. So again, there's some business continuity issues that we are addressing. I'll talk a little bit later in the program of what Wisconsin is doing about that. On the other side, consumer confidence issues. Okay, you heard, FMD is not a human health issue. However, that's not going to stop the consumers from being alarmed and worried. And if anything would impact consumer confidence and decrease the willingness of consumers to buy dairy products, that hurts everyone in this room. So again, there's some issues with making sure we have factual science-based messaging that works in concert with the government to make sure that we have assured the consumer that dairy products continue to be safe and highly nutritious and suitable for serving the family. So I'm going to talk about both of those. Food defense is a relatively new term the last 5-7 years, and it's really all of the activities that encompass protecting the nation's food supply. When we talk about an on-farm food defense program, which I'm going to spend a couple minutes on, it's really the series of management steps that an individual farm or facility would take to prevent the intentional contamination of anything on the farm, be it the animals, we're talking about animal health, or the potential contamination of, say, the bulk tank. Now, we're framing this about protecting the intentional contamination. If anyone's been following what's been happening out in California and New Mexico with some of the bovine tuberculosis, that wasn't an intentional contamination. So again, we might simply want to add back a lot of these things could also help to prevent any of the unintentional contamination, which we had previously deemed food safety. When we talk about an on-farm food defense program, we can look at 4 management components, and I'll just spend a couple minutes on each one of these. We've got, the operations or the management side, protecting the environment, protecting the product, and then protecting the animals. First of all, if you think about any system, whether it's your farm, business, unless there's management buy-in, things aren't going to happen. So first and foremost, there has to be, management wanting to do these type of programs. And when you talk about a documented food defense policy, if you ask most people, what's that? They'll probably, kind of scratch their head. What we're talking about here, there are places to find this information, and we can help anyone put these things together. But basically, a food defense policy looks at the risks associated with your farm, and then what mitigation strategies that you can have in place to either prevent or lessen the risk. Also, animal biosecurity. Again, anything you can do to protect the health of your animals, that's good. You want to protect them from any type of infectious disease. And there's a lot of contact points on a farm, so as long as you understand the potential contamination points, you can do something about it. If you were following Darlene's presentation, she talked a lot about once the investigation starts, they're looking at tracking the potential disease flow out, or possibly how the disease got to that farm in the first place. The idea would be that the index farm, as we call it, was where it started. In reality, that's probably not going to be the case. So then you also have to follow the trail backwards. So when we talk about product recall traceback, the faster that the investigation can happen, the better off everyone is. So again, we're talking about all of the inputs coming to your farm, all of the outputs coming out, and really having a paper trail or records, could be electronic, doesn't have to be paper these days, but the ability to track inputs and outputs at the farm level. Now, if you have a great program and it's in a binder and you don't tell your employees about it, it's probably not much of a program. So again, training of your employees is very important. I always make the point that if you're a family farm, every family member is an employee. They're not just part of the family, so make sure all of the employees, i.e. family members, are trained. And again, emergency contact information, if you have that readily available, you can have it by the phone. You pick up the phone and you can call rather than trying to look for it. And again, it's important to make sure that it's up to date. Oops, wrong way. Okay, environmental management. Again, I work a lot with the dairy processors. They have 4 walls, doors, and windows. A lot easier to control that environment than, say, a 200-acre open farm environment. So there are practical ways to do it. First and foremost, we talk about a visitor policy. And again, what we talk about there is there's certain essential routine visitors, there's some essential non-routine visitors, and there's other folks. So you should have a policy of how you're going to handle everyone coming onto your farm. Again, obviously a veterinarian is a regular essential visitor, so you have a visitor policy specific for them, and then you have visitor logs. Okay, one of the mindsets is everyone has to come to this one little spot to sign in. Well, that may restrict the business flow. If the veterinarian always comes to a certain area and queues up, you could have a visitor log specific for the veterinarian. There's many operations where the feed truck has a specific entrance and goes around to the back. So you could have a visitor log for the feed supplier at that spot. So again, there's ways to make it business friendly. The other thing is, while these are great things to do, how can you add value to your business? One of the ways is you're not always at the farm, and I pick on veterinarians, but if the veterinarian sends you a bill from last Tuesday that they were there from 3 in the afternoon till 7 at night, you weren't home, it's likely they were there, but if you go to the visitor log and they're signed in for those hours, it's easy to match up the invoice. Same thing on the load of feed. Obviously, you can tell if the feed person delivered, but again, when they send you a bill, you can match up to the visitor log. So there's ways to add value. Also, again, Darlene talked about the investigation. They're always going to track what comes on, what comes off. So, movement logs are essential. And water security, if you want to shut down any kind of business, contaminated water, will do it immediately. Also, product management. Again, maintaining the integrity of the product. Again, we've talked a lot about restricted access to the milking parlor and the bulk tanks, etc. Also recognize that in addition to raw milk, the animals themselves are products. And so that leads kind of to the animal health management side. Every dairy producer knows that a healthy animal is better for their business. But how do you go about doing that? Again, you definitely want to have a animal health program. We're both from Wisconsin, so we always put the pitch in to make sure that every premise is ID'd in the state. But again, here are some of the other components of an animal health plan that, again, not only are good for emergency preparedness, but make good business sense. I went through those really quickly, and there's many sources to find the same information. I'll put a plug in for our national counterpart, Dairy Management Inc. and the Dairy Response Center. Again, this is a joint effort between Dairy Management Inc., National Milk Producers Federation, and the International Dairy Foods Association. We have David Pelzer from DMI in the audience, so ask him the hard questions after the presentation. Also, again, another challenge that dairy producers face is animal well-being. Okay, this is not directly related to our topic today, but a lot of the principle and guideline programs that are going to be finalized, they're being announced at 10 o'clock Thursday morning, come back for that, talk about management programs, talk about animal health. They're a very good complement to all of the emergency preparedness programs and the good management of your farm. So I wanted to put in a pitch for that as well. Business continuity planning. What are we doing in Wisconsin? We talked about stopping the movement. Okay, how many have the ability to store raw milk on the farm for 3 days or 7 days? Nobody. Okay, so there's some issues. So one of the things, and again, it's not a product that you can store and use a week later. So what we've come up with, and we haven't finalized it yet, the concept is there, and we've got an industry committee and Department of Ag working on this, but regionalizing the milk flow. Again, Darlene showed some of the quarantine effects, but basically, if we can move the milk within specific zones, we've got some pre-identified cheese plants. Wisconsin has an advantage because we have, complexity of 13,600 plus dairy farms, but we also have 200 plus dairy plants, many of them dedicated to cheese. So again, we move the milk to a pre-identified cheese plant, we make it into cheese, and therefore we stabilize and save the protein, and then we can kind of worry about what to do with it afterwards. Okay, there's still some issues, but at least we have the dairy product in a stabilized form to worry about. So that's one thing. Obviously, it takes a coordinated effort, and it won't be business as usual for producers, transporters, and dairy plants. But the whole concept is get the milk moving as quick as possible and at least salvaging some economic value at every stage of the industry. The other side I talked about consumer confidence. Again, if we lose market, then it doesn't matter if we get back in business. No one wants to buy our products. We're still out of business. So in Wisconsin, we have the Wisconsin Agro-Security Resource Network. Again, I happen to be the chairperson of the organization at this point, but it's really a network of industry and government agencies, and we kind of have three main areas where we facilitate the industry-wide response to, first of all, we create the awareness, we help with the response. Again, all of the things we do here are in coordination and conjunction with the government agencies. It's always important to recognize that, we talk about ICS, there's an incident commander that's responsible for everything. And that includes all the response, includes all the information. So again, we work in conjunction with that. We want to disseminate quickly science, fact-based information. Can you think of any, perhaps, other organizations that don't really like to rely on fact, especially science-based fact? So again, if we're not out in front, we're going to be fighting an uphill battle against misinformation. So it's important to have that information ready to go, which we do, and out to the consumer, to the media, and even the rest of the industry. And again, we're all wrapped around maintaining consumer confidence in the U.S. food system, and in my case in particular, the Wisconsin dairy industry. Again, here's just the website. It's in your handout. So, in summary then, what can and should each producer be doing today? Okay, you should at least have some on-farm food defense biosecurity programs. Again, we have an ideal program. Each farm's different. Most farms would never be able to have the ideal, especially as some of the older farms, but at least if you recognize the risk and put as best of mitigation system in place as you can, you're better off. So again, here's some of the things to do. Always you want to coordinate with your processing plant and all the programs that they're working on. Also, again, the state's working on some business continuity plans that have to be in conjunction with the processors and the individual farms. And if you don't get involved at the local level by, first of all, knowing who your local emergency manager is, not being involved in the planning or local response, and then the exercising of those plans, and also then by training yourself and your employees, then there's no way you can be prepared. So again, our message is a positive one. Again, there are things in place to have a response, but importantly, the things you can do on your farm and your plant and the rest of your business actually can have a positive effect on your bottom line. So with that, we'll be glad to take questions. Thank you.